Hey, what is up guys? Calum or Calum's Fish Tanks, and in today's video we're going to be talking about how to keep a tank algae free, or how to lower your algae in general. So let's get started. Algae uses the same nutrients and light and everything as our plants to grow. So when you have an imbalance or an abundance of nutrients that your plants aren't going to use, algae will use it instead. So to keep a tank algae free, you have to learn to balance it. And that's basically keeping enough nutrients for your plants to grow, but not enough for algae to grow as well. Now this can be quite a confusing topic for a lot of people who are new to the hobby, but I'm going to make it pretty simple for you guys and teach you guys how to balance a tank, as well as some other stuff to help keep the tank algae free. Now there's a couple things that can cause these imbalances in your tanks, one of which can be your fertilizers. If you're fertilizing too much or too little, it can lead to imbalances. Also, overstocking of fish or overfeeding can lead to imbalances in your tank, as well as dying plant material. As plant leaves die, they'll release all those nutrients back into the water, leading to algae in your tank. So these are three things you have to consider when you're dealing with algae. Now I've been in this hobby for quite a while, and usually when people talk about imbalances, they're usually referring to fertilizers. So that's the only thing I would consider. So I got stuck in a loop of changing my fertilizers, waiting a couple weeks, thinking my algae would disappear, and it would still be there. So I'd do this over and over again and got stuck in a big loop of just changing my fertilizers, hoping it fixed the algae, and then it wouldn't, and then changing them again. I've learned over the years that don't focus too much on your fertilizers. You know, they create too much of a headache if that's all you're gonna focus on. For all you beginners out there or advanced aquarists alike, I'm gonna save you guys a bit of a headache and just recommend getting some kind of all-in-one fertilizer, or just mixing, you know, a standard EI mix if you're mixing your own, but for beginners, an all-in-one. I use Tropica Specialized and Premium on all of my tanks. Here you can see, if it'll focus, the Specialized, which is the green one, the Premium's the orange one, and this is what I use on all of my tanks. I just follow the instructions and I don't worry about my fertilizers. I just recommend getting an all-in-one fertilizer, something like Tropica, but I know that one's hard to get in the States, so there's also Easy Green and Thrive, which will work good as well. I'd get some kind of all-in-one fertilizer and just stick to what the instructions say. Don't mess around with it too much, and find the other problems that are causing your algae before you mess around with your ferts. The real keys for keeping your tank algae free are in your tank maintenance and in your tank equipment. Now I'm not going to go tell you to change all your equipment though. Keep all that stuff the same, but you got to learn how to work with what you have. Now making your equipment work for you is going to take a little bit of trial and error, and you may need to switch out some plants. So what I want you to do is take a look at your tank and check out all your different species of plants. See which ones are doing well for you and which ones aren't. The ones that aren't and they're dying aren't going to help you at all. The key to algae is keeping healthy plants. If you don't have healthy plants, the plants are just going to die and cause more algae. So any plants that aren't thriving, you either could upgrade your equipment, which I know not everyone wants to do, or you could just switch it to a different plant and see if you have success with that one. I recommend trying a bunch of different things till you find what works for you. I've been stubborn in the past and had a plant I really liked but was barely holding on and just dying away in the tank. When you have that happen, the plant slowly rots away and the leaves die and release a bunch of nutrients into the water, which allows algae to strike, and it's going to cost you a lot of headache. If you have any of those plants that you want to keep for future projects, I'd recommend, taking them out and moving them into like a little immersed setup, something like this. This is just a little container with a lid that keeps high humidity in with a little bit of dirt, and I'm keeping some Bucephalandra alive in here. Most plants will adapt well to this, and if you have a plant species you want to keep, you can move it into a setup like this instead of keeping it in your tank if it is just dying. Back to fertilizers real quick, because I forgot to say something for all my low-tech people, but some of you may not need fertilizer. If you're growing a lot of epiphytic and slow-growing rhizome plants, things like Anubias and Java fern, they probably don't need any kind of fertilizer. Your fish should provide enough nutrients. If you're growing a lot of swords and crypts, those may not need fertilizers either. Just a lot of root tabs will help keep those plants happy and healthy. You don't need to add anything to your water column. It's all about knowing your plants and what their needs are. For example, in this tank I'm growing, some faster growing stem plants, so I do need an all-in-one fertilizer, but you may not. There's so many videos out there that claim you can get rid of algae in seconds, but that's really not the case. With algae, it's going to be a long battle, and you may be able to kill it really quickly, but that doesn't mean it'll come back, especially if you use something like hydrogen peroxide, which I've done in the past, but learn my lesson from now. The real key is a good maintenance routine, and that will really prevent algae from coming back. So let's talk about that a little bit. Good maintenance is more than just a weekly water change and scraping your glass. Most people should do that, and if you have an overstocked tank, you should do it a little bit more. I remember I talked about too many fish earlier causing algae. If you got too many fish, do your water changes a little more often or a little bigger, and that should help as well. But good maintenance is much more than scraping your glass and draining the tank and filling it back up. So let's talk a little bit about what maintenance I do to keep my tanks algae free. Now, one thing I want to ask you is, when was the last time you cleaned your filter? Drop the answer down below in the comments. Cleaning your filter is essential for keeping a healthy and clean planted tank. Your filter takes all the gunk out of the water and holds it all, but that slowly breaks down, releasing organics which will cause nasty algae like blackbeard algae, staghorn algae, and many more. So clean your filters if you haven't done it in a while. That could help you out a lot. But there's a couple more things I want to talk about with maintenance. So algae isn't a war, it's a battle, and we're going to use the 7.5 gallon tank behind me as an example. This tank isn't completely algae free yet, but I'm working on it slowly and slowly getting closer after every maintenance session. In this tank, every week I go in with a pipette and stir the detritus out of my substrate. In this tank, it's got a lot of slow growing carpeting plants around the front, and that's where I do this. Those slow growing plants don't need a lot of nutrients, so I get rid of this stuff, because if I don't, that abundance of nutrients will just turn into algae. If you have things like swords or crypts that are heavy root feeders that need a lot more nutrients, I wouldn't do it for those. I just leave that sit in the substrate. But if you do start noticing problems like BBA, staghorn algae, or BBA is blackbeard algae or staghorn algae, then I would recommend going in with a pipette and stirring up the substrate every once in a while. In this tank, I also have Hygrophila polysperma, which is a fast-growing stem plant, and it grows pretty big. And because of that, it shades out the lower halves of the leaves because there isn't a super strong light on this tank. When that happens, the bottom leaves start to die, and those I have started going in and picking out with a pair of my tweezers to remove, because if I don't, those leaves will just break down, releasing nutrients. Now, I didn't do this for a long time because I didn't realize what it was causing in my tank. I realized I started getting a lot of green spot algae on the healthier leaves of my Hygrophila polysperma, which was likely caused to these breaking down leaves in the tank. So now, hopefully, that I keep up on this maintenance with picking out the dead leaves, this should go away in not too long. Now, every tank's a little bit different, but hopefully these examples helped you out a little bit to learn something new. Dead leaves are something I always recommend doing in any tank, removing those. But some tanks you may need a skimmer, for example, because you trim your carpet and you can't get rid of all those trimmings. Those will also contribute to algae as they slowly break down. Like I mentioned, every tank's different, so you're gonna have to adjust your maintenance depending on your tank to keep it in the best condition to keep algae out of it. So hopefully this video helped you out a bit with your own algae problems. Just remember to be patient. It's not a battle, it's a war. It's gonna take a while, but eventually you'll get there to having completely algae-free tanks. But anyways, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. This was Calum's Fish Tanks. Peace.